Henry comes to the throne as a very young, very arrogant man. Most young men are, I suppose. I certainly was, at the age of 17 years and 10 months. And when I do a version of this lecture to audiences of sixth formers, largely male ones, they think this is a very good thing, that a boy of 17 years and 10 months becomes effectively absolute master of his country. The rest of us, of course, older and wiser, shudder at the thought, as indeed did contemporaries. Henry came to the throne with a single purpose, which was to reverse his father Henry VII, again, as is very typical and what we are all very familiar with the story of executives of large organizations. One generation goes and another one comes along with absolute reversal of policy objectives, but of course leaving very considerable inertia within the organization. And Henry's inheritance from his father, I think, is a fascinating study of what you do with that inertia and how you overcome it. He comes to the throne then with the goal of reversing his father's profoundly pacific foreign policy and doing the traditional thing that, you know, any proper king of England, or indeed any red-blooded young man of any period, indeed, before the First World War, wants to do, which is to go out and biff, especially to go out and biff the French. I mean, it's an ambition which is still regarded as being perfectly respectable on the rugger field, though no longer, alas, in foreign policy. Though with the activities of Messrs. Merkel and Sarkozy, I would have thought that the traditional view of European politics is rather rapidly going to return. But I'm being semi-serious. All sorts of, haven't you? Just think about it. All sorts of problems that we thought were solved clearly aren't. The wheel turns. We all thought union with Scotland was an absolute datum. It's after all been there since 1603, ratified by Parliament in 1707. I'll take a level bet it will have gone in 5 years. The idea, I mean, just quickly again, coming in on these big ideas, we've all sold ourselves on the notion of steady advance or progress. It may very well be that the ancient world's view of cycle, after all, we know now there are business cycles, and all Gordon Brown's attempts to pretend that there weren't. Do you remember end to boom and bust? If business goes in cycles, if economics go in cycles, why shouldn't other things? And why do we always assume it's an upward spiral? Right. Having put that thought in your head, now let's actually go back to where we were with Henry. So Henry then, it wants to do what any red-bloody king of England does, which is to go and fight the French. However, he finds himself confronted by two things. He finds himself confronted by what had become an established tradition, namely his father's, as I said, profoundly pacific policy, which is also underpinned by something else, which I gather also is not entirely unknown in business, a structure of bribes and backhanders. That is to say that the whole of the English political establishment had been bought by the French. Terribly simple and straightforward, and it had been done with the connivance of Henry VII, because that way you wedded personal self-interest to higher national objectives. He wanted to reverse the English tradition of fighting the French. Why not get the French to pay to bribe the English establishment? It's an extraordinarily effective, if rather unethical way of doing it, but high political leadership, generally speaking, hasn't much regard for ethics, at least in private, whatever it may say about them in public. Henry then has got to overcome this, and he's also got to overcome, I think, a very effective series of assumptions that peace was a good thing, that England had benefited from it, and so on. Now, how well equipped was he to do this? Well, the traditional picture is very confused. One is, and again, I think it's something that we very often imagine to be the case in business leadership. There is the notion that if you're the boss, things just happen. I don't think that's true. However effective the command structure of a company, it doesn't actually work like that. seems to me. So, and nor did it work for Henry, particularly, of course, because he's so young and inexperienced. There is effectively a kind of Regency Council put in place to restrain him and hold him down. And the second thing is, just how well equipped was he personally? Well, the traditional view of Henry is that although he was brilliantly talented in every way you can think of, that he's physically talented, he's he's kind of, super intelligent Ivy League jock, and he's highly an excellent, if not indeed a sort of super competitive sportsman. He's also highly intelligent and highly educated and excellent at everything from music to mathematics to poetry to languages and so on. So he's got very, very high talent, but the general view of him, of course, is that he's a bit of a playboy, as you might very well expect from that kind of background. It's kind of Bullingdon Club with added intelligence, isn't it? Sort of background, that kind of playboy background. What I've been able to find out, however, is very remarkable. A completely unknown and unused set of documents have come up, which show that Henry, far from being the playboy that we think of him as being, begins his reign immediately after his coronation by finding somebody totally from the left field. And this again seems to me to be very important in processes of change. What you see throughout with Henry is that he doesn't use the normal structures to do extraordinary things.